Anti-aircraft warfare or counter-air defense is defined by NATO as all measures designed to nullify or reduce the effectiveness of hostile air action. They include ground and air-based weapon systems, associated sensor systems, command and control arrangements and passive measures. It may be used to protect naval, ground, and air forces in any location. However, for most countries the main effort has tended to be homeland defense. NATO refers to airborne air defense as counter-air and naval air defense as anti-aircraft warfare. Missile defense is an extension of air defense, as are initiatives to adapt air defense to the task of intercepting any projectile in flight. In some countries, such as Britain and Germany during the Second World War, the Soviet Union and NATO's Allied Command Europe, ground-based air defense and air defense aircraft have been under integrated command and control. However, while overall air defense may be for homeland defense, including military facilities, forces in the field, wherever they are, invariably deploy their own air defense capability if there is an air threat. A surface-based air defense capability can also be deployed defensively to deny the use of airspace to an opponent. Until the 1950s, guns firing ballistic munitions ranging from 20 mm to 150 mm were the standard weapon. Guided missiles then became dominant, except at the very shortest ranges. Terminology. The term air defense was probably first used by Britain when Air Defensive Great Britain was created as a Royal Air Force Command in 1925. However, arrangements in the UK were also called anti-aircraft, abbreviated as AA, a term that remained in general use into the 1950s. After the First World War it was sometimes prefixed by light or heavy to classify a type of gun or unit. Nicknames for anti-aircraft guns include AA, AAA, AAA, an abbreviation of anti-aircraft artillery, ACAC, and Archie. NATO defines anti-aircraft warfare as measures taken to defend a maritime force against attacks by airborne weapons launched from aircraft, ships, submarines and land-based sites. Quote, in some armies the term all-arms air defense is used for air defense by non-specialist troops. Other terms from the late 20th century include GBAD with related terms SHORAD and MANPADS. Anti-aircraft missiles are variously called surface-to-air missile, abbreviated and pronounced SAM, and surface-to-air guided weapon. Non-English terms for air defense include the German Flak, whence English flak, and the Russian term protivovozdushная obrona, a literal translation of anti-air defense, abbreviated as PVO. In Russian the AA systems are called Zenithny systems. In French, air defense is called DCA. The maximum distance at which a gun or missile can engage an aircraft is an important figure. However, many different definitions are used, but unless the same definition is used, performance of different guns or missiles cannot be compared. For AA guns, only the ascending part of the trajectory can be usefully used. One term is ceiling, maximum ceiling being the height a projectile would reach if fired vertically. Not practically useful in itself, as few AA guns are able to fire vertically. A maximum fuse duration may be too short, but potentially useful as a standard to compare different weapons. The British adopted effective ceiling, meaning the altitude at which a gun could deliver a series of shells against a moving target. This could be constrained by maximum fuse running time as well as the gun's capability. By the late 1930s, the British definition was the height at which a directly approaching target at 400 miles per hour can be engaged for 20 seconds before the gun reaches 70 degrees elevation. However, effective ceiling for heavy AA guns was affected by non-ballistic factors. The maximum running time of the fuse, this set the maximum usable time of flight. the capability of fire control instruments to determine target height at long range, the precision of the cyclic rate of fire. The fuse length had to be calculated and set for where the target would be at the time of flight after firing. To do this meant knowing exactly when the round would fire. General description: the essence of air defense is to detect hostile aircraft and destroy them. The critical issue is to hit a target moving in three-dimensional space. An attack must not only match these three coordinates, but must do so at the time the target is at the position. This means that projectiles either have to be guided to hit the target, or aimed at the predicted position of the target at the time the projectile reaches it, taking into account speed and direction of both the target and the projectile. Throughout the 20th century, air defense was one of the fastest evolving areas of military technology, responding to the evolution of aircraft and exploiting various enabling technologies, particularly radar, guided missiles and computing. Air defense evolution covered the areas of sensors and technical fire control, weapons, and command and control. At the start of the 20th century, these were either very primitive and non-existent. Initially, sensors were optical and acoustic devices developed during the First World War and continued into the 1930s, but were quickly superseded by radar, which in turn was supplemented by optronics in the 1980s. Command and control remained primitive until the late 1930s, when Britain created an integrated system for ADGB that linked the ground-based air defense of the Army's AA Command. Although field-deployed air defense relied on less sophisticated arrangements, NATO later called these arrangements an air defense ground environment, defined as the network of ground radar sites and command and control centers within a specific theater of operations which are used for the tactical control of air defense operations. Rules of engagement are critical to prevent air defenses engaging friendly and neutral aircraft. The use is assisted but not governed by IFF electronic devices originally introduced during the Second World War. While these rules originate at the highest authority, different rules can apply to different types of air defense covering the same area at the same time. AAAD usually operates under the tightest rules. NATO calls these rules weapon control orders. They are weapons-free. A weapon control order imposing a status whereby weapon systems may be fired at any target not positively recognized as friendly. Weapons tight. A weapon control order imposing a status whereby weapon systems may be fired only at targets recognized as hostile. Weapons held. A weapon control order imposing a status whereby weapon systems may only be fired in self-defense or in response to a formal order. Until the 1950s, guns firing ballistic munitions were the standard weapon. Guided missiles then became dominant, except at the very shortest ranges. However, the type of shell or warhead and its fusing and, with missiles, the guidance arrangement, vary. Targets are not always easy to destroy. Nonetheless, damaged aircraft may be forced to abort the mission and, even if they manage to return and land in friendly territory, may be out of action for days or permanently. Ignoring small arms and smaller machine guns, ground-based air defense guns have varied in caliber from 20 mm to at least 150 mm. Ground-based air defense is deployed in several ways: self-defense by ground forces using their organic weapons, AAAD, accompanying defense, specialist aid defense elements accompanying armored or infantry units, point defense around a key target such as a bridge, critical government building, a ship, area air defense, typically belts of air defense to provide a barrier, but sometimes an umbrella covering an area. Areas can vary widely in size. They may extend along a nation's border, e.g., the Cold War M23 Hawker night belts that ran north-south across Germany, across a military formations maneuver area, or above a city or port. In ground operations, air defense areas may be used offensively by rapid redeployment across current aircraft transit routes. Air defense has included other elements, although after the Second World War most fell into disuse. Tethered barrage balloons to deter and threaten aircraft flying below the height of the balloons, where they are susceptible to damaging collisions with steel tethers. Searchlights to illuminate aircraft at night for both gun layers and optical instrument operators. During World War II, searchlights became radar-controlled. Large smoke screens created by large smoke canisters on the ground to screen targets and prevent accurate weapon aiming by aircraft. Passive air defense is defined by NATO as passive measures taken for the physical defense and protection of personnel, essential installations and equipment in order to minimize the effectiveness of air and/or missile attack. It remains a vital activity by ground forces and includes camouflage and concealment to avoid detection by reconnaissance on attacking aircraft. Measures such as camouflaging important buildings were common in the Second World War. During the Cold War, the runways and taxiways of some airfields were painted green. Organization. While navies are usually responsible for their own air defense, at least for ships at sea, organizational arrangements for land-based air defense vary between nations and over time. The most extreme case was the Soviet Union, and this model may still be followed in some countries. It was a separate service, on a par with the Navy, a ground force. In the Soviet Union, this was called Vojska PVO, and had both fighter aircraft and ground-based systems. This was divided into two arms: PVO Strany, the Strategic Air Defense Service responsible for air defense of the homeland, created in 1941 and becoming an independent service in 1954, and PVO-SV, Air Defense of the Ground Forces. Subsequently, these became part of the Air Force and Ground Forces respectively. At the other extreme, the United States Army has an air defense artillery branch that provided ground-based air defense for both homeland and the Army in the field. Many other nations also deploy an air defense branch in the Army. In Britain and some other armies, the single artillery branch has been responsible for both home and overseas ground-based air defense, although there was divided responsibility with the Royal Navy for air defense of the British Isles in World War I. However, during the Second World War, the RAF Regiment was formed to protect airfields everywhere, and this included light air defenses. In the later decades of the Cold War, this included the United States Air Force's operating bases in UK. However, all ground-based air defense was removed from Royal Air Force jurisdiction in 2004. The British Army's Anti-Aircraft Command was disbanded in March 1955, but during the 1960s and 1970s the RAF's Fight Command operated long-range air defense missiles to protect key areas in the UK. During World War II, the Royal Marines also provided air defense units, formerly part of the Mobile Naval Base Defense Organization. They were handled as an integral part of the Army-commanded ground-based air defenses. The basic air defense unit is typically a battery with 2 to 12 guns, a missile launchers and fire control elements. These batteries, particularly with guns, usually deploy in a small area. Although batteries may be split, this is usual for some missile systems. SHORAD missile batteries often deploy across an area with individual launchers several kilometers apart. When MANPADS is operated, operated by specialists. Batteries may have several dozen teams deploying separately in small sections. Self-propelled air defense guns may deploy in pairs. Batteries are usually grouped into battalions or equivalent. In the field army, a light gun or SHORAD battalion is often assigned to a maneuver division. Heavier guns and long-range missiles may be in air defense brigades and come under Corps or higher command. Homeland air defense may have a full military structure. For example, the UK's Anti-Aircraft Command, commanded by a full British Army general, was part of ADGB. At its peak in 1941–42, it comprised 3 AA Corps with 12 AA divisions between them.